Hey everyone, it's Heather Nichols. I have an anniversary card to share with you that I created doing some ink blending using my blender brushes and my very favorite color of ink, Sugar Cube. I'll be using the Botanical Beauty Background to do my stamping. I'll also use the framed script Happy die to do part of my sentiment. I'll be using the Inside Scoop Anniversary stamp set, specifically this Happy Anniversary sentiment. I'll be using Confetti Cake and Cookie Monster inks to do some ink blending on my project. I'll also use my coordinating blender brush to do the blending. I will also use Oreo ink and Sugar Cube ink. And then to add some splatters, I'll be using some Cookie Monster liquid watercolor as well as a Sugar Cube ink refill, a water brush, and an acrylic block. I'll use the Bits and Pieces white rhinestones along with the Crystal Katana tool to place them and the multimedia mat. I'm doing my blending with Cookie Monster and Confetti Cake inks on a piece of Toffee cardstock with my blender brush. I'm going to start at the bottom in the darker color and work my way up to the lighter color towards the top. So I'm just going to put my blender brush into my ink pad in a circular motion to pick up ink onto my blender brush and then use that same circular motion on my cardstock. I'll switch to Confetti Cake ink and work my way up towards the top of my piece of cardstock so that I have a blend from a dark turquoise all the way up to the toffee color at the top. Next, I'll be stamping the Botanical Beauty Background onto my blended background on the Toffee cardstock using Sugar Cube ink. I'm first going to set my cardstock up into my MISTI, and I'll put a little bit of adhesive down right onto the paper inside the MISTI to stick the cardstock to, just to keep it still. Just a little bit of extra reassurance that it's not going to move around on me. And then I'll take the Botanical Beauty Background and I'm going to line this up across the bottom of my cardstock so that it's not covering the whole piece, just that bottom edge. I'll close the lid of the MISTI to pick up the stamp, ink it up with Sugar Cube ink, and stamp it onto my blended cardstock. You may want to stamp your impression more than once to get a nice bright white crisp image. I'm taking my piece of cardstock and flipping it completely around, and I'm setting that right back in my MISTI where I had it before, and I am inking up my stamp once again, and I'll stamp that across the whole piece of the cardstock so that I have a border across the bottom and a border across the top. I'm using Sugar Cube ink refill and Cookie Monster liquid watercolor to add splatters to my project. I'll add a few drops of each to an acrylic block, pick it up with a wet paintbrush, and then I'll tap the paintbrush over my finger to add splatters across the whole project. I added Stick It, which is a double-sided adhesive, to the back of 3 pieces of Sugar Cube cardstock to cut the framed script Happy die from. I die cut the framed script Happy die 3 times with the pieces of Sugar Cube cardstock that I just put the Stick It on the back of, and then I'll poke out all of the extra pieces between the letters and the frame. I'll stack the 3 die cut pieces together and they will be all adhered together in one piece, and they'll just be a little bit thicker and just pop on my project just a little bit more than if I had just done one layer. I've attached a piece of acetate inside of my MISTI to use as a guide for stamping this anniversary sentiment. I just want to stamp anniversary from this Happy Anniversary sentiment onto my project. To figure out exactly where I want the anniversary to go, I'm just setting the happy frame down onto my project and using a pencil to draw a guideline for the bottom of the frame. Once you get the frame attached, this guideline doesn't even show, so don't worry about erasing anything on your project, but you can see it well enough to be able to line up your stamp. I'll set the cardstock down into the MISTI and put the acetate down over the top. I'm also tucking my magnet in there just to make sure everything stays in place. And then I'll take the stamp and line it up with my pencil line to get kind of a first gauge of where it's going to land on my project. I'm closing the lid of the MISTI to pick up the stamp, and then before I ink it up, I'm adding a piece of tape over the word Happy because I don't want that part of the stamp to ink up. Once I have the tape covering the word, I'll ink up the stamp with Oreo ink, and before I stamp it on the acetate, I will remove the piece of tape. Because if you don't remove the piece of tape, you'll get a great big black smudge on your project. Ask me how I know. Once this word is stamped, I can adjust the cardstock underneath the acetate to make sure that the sentiment is landing exactly where I want it to on the project. I'm using the pencil line that I made with the frame to line it up exactly where I want it to go. I'll add tape to my stamp covering the word Happy once again. I'll ink up my stamp with Oreo ink. I'll make sure the acetate is flipped up so I don't stamp on that. I will remove the tape and then close the lid of the MISTI to stamp anniversary onto my project. Once the word anniversary is stamped on my cardstock, I can add the happy frame over the top to complete my sentiment. I did a line of stitching on the bottom of my card using my sewing machine, and then I'm adding the stamped piece to a sugar cube card base. I like to line my cards up at the top of the card base so that just a little bit of the card base peeks out at the bottom of the card. For a finishing touch to this card, I'm adding a bit of sparkle with the bits and pieces white rhinestones. I'm adding those scattered around the sentiment. I'll use the crystal katana tool to help place the rhinestones where I want them to go, and then I'll use multimedia mat to adhere the rhinestones to my project. I hope you enjoyed this anniversary project, and I hope you learned something new today. You can find the supplies to create this project at the Tailored Expressions web store at tailoredexpressions.com. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.